Hey guys, Mr. Letty here again. This is our next video in our series. This should be a relatively short video today. Just going to go over some stuff with erosion and rivers. You are going to get an assignment for Thursday. I'm going to resend out that answer sheet that was incorrect, and I'm going to give you guys a test wizard assignment that I will then post a video late in the day going over the questions. You will have a quiz on Friday. All right. So again, it's going to be quiz on Friday just on weathering. You'll have a test wizard tomorrow that's going to be practice, and you can message me if you have any questions. But I will post another video later in the day of me going over all of the questions. Okay, so let's get into it. All right. So when we're talking about rivers, we have very specific land formations we're looking for. The first one is going to be a V-shaped valley, which you could see in this picture here, that the valley looks like a capital V. All right. So whenever we see that, that's going to indicate that there's a river at the bottom of that valley. All right. Or a stream. Rivers, streams, all going to be the same thing. Okay. And you're going to see that the land is going to have a relatively smooth, rounded shape to it. The reason why we're pointing out a V-shaped valley is later on when we talk about glaciers, you're going to see another type of valley, which is a U-shaped valley, and it will be very distinct and different from the V-shaped valley. Okay, so our features of streams and rivers. Okay, so all streams and rivers have several features in common. We've talked about this before. Where a river starts is called a source. Okay, so that source could be snowmelt coming from the mountains. It could be an underground spring that's bubbling up. Okay, there's a number of different things. Could be a combination of things. Doesn't always have to be one thing. All right, the steeper the slope, the faster the river is going to run. Makes sense. So if you were going to go tubing or rafting, you want to go where it's relatively steep so you'll have the fastest water. If you're looking to just have a nice relaxing, float on a tube somewhere on a river, you want a nice flat section so it's nice and calm. Okay. Where do our streams and rivers end? All right. So if you look at the picture at the left, you're going to see that. So hopefully some of you are already picking up on what that is. That is in fact the mouth. And what do we call that? We call it a delta. All right. So the most famous one and the one they talk about the most on the Regents is going to be the Mississippi River Delta. Okay. So as the water is flowing, it flows down the river. It's carrying all kinds of mud and sediment and rocks, and it hits a bigger body of water. Well, what happens to the river water as it hits the bigger body of water? It slows down. And then, as we're going to find out probably later this week when we go over the reference table chart, depending on how fast it is, that will determine the size of the sediment it carries. So the faster the river is flowing, the bigger the pieces, the slower it's flowing, the smaller the pieces. And then when it slows way down, those pieces just drop right down to the bottom in something we call deposition. And it's going to make interesting little fan-like formations, which we call deltas. Okay. So if we're looking here, you have your V-shaped valleys. You can kind of see that, and you can see in the left here, the river running through the bottom. So if for some odd reason you found yourself hiking and you were lost and ran out of water, you'd want to look and see if you can find a V-shaped valley and go to the bottom of that. So if you can go to the bottom of that, that's probably where you're going to find a river, okay, or some sort of stream, creek, whatever you want to call it. As we start at the top in the picture on the right, that's our source. Okay, so again, could be snowmelt, could be a spring. Flows relatively fast down the hill. It's eroding away at the sides of the mountains, okay, which is giving you this V-shaped valley as it digs through. Okay, and then it'll flow out through the river and so on. Okay, now our small streams. I want you to think of like a tree. where the main trunk is the main part of the river, okay, and then all the branches coming off the main trunk, okay, are going to be something we call a tributary. Okay, so all these smaller streams and rivers that flow into the bigger river, we're going to call the tributaries. All right, certain times of the year, stream or river may overflow. This happens a lot with the Mississippi River, and there'll be years where you're going to notice in the news it happens a whole lot. Okay, where it's going to flood and overflow that area, and we have millions of people who live very close to the Mississippi or other rivers when they flood, and their houses get destroyed. Okay, that's because they're living on someplace called a floodplain. So if we look at the picture again in the bottom right hand corner, all of this stuff out here that's going to be in your orange and your red, that's going to be the floodplain. Okay, so if the river has way too much water in it, it's going to overflow its banks and it'll flood into the floodplain. So why do you think people might live there if we know that this is an area that floods? Well, if the river is flooding, that means it's taking all of this sediment and all the nutrients that it has, and it's overflowing and depositing those sediments. So this actually makes very good farmland. So we tend to want to grow a lot of crops in floodplains because the crops grow very, very well. All right, so we take the chance of living there, planting there, knowing that every few years, maybe once every 10 years or so, depending on the river, you're going to have a season where it floods. Okay? So continuing our features of the river, which we really just went over. So the river source, the tributaries, all these little guys up here at the top, the main river, the floodplain with the houses, and I'm guessing those are sheep, I think. Whatever, little white things over there. All right. The curves of the river we're going to call a meander. Okay, we'll get a little bit further into that. You guys are going to learn way more than you ever wanted to about rivers over the next few days. All right, so the meander is the curve, all right, and how it's slowly moving around. And these curves tend to happen when the water is flowing slowly. Okay, if it's flowing fast, it tends to just cut straight through. Then we get to the bottom, so the river mouth where it empties out into the larger body of water, and that's where our delta is forming. Okay, a couple of other things that we'll look for. And again, we're going to go into this in much, much more detail. Just wanted to point it out today. Anybody who's flown into Central Florida, you will see these sea-looking lakes, which we call oxbow lakes. Okay, and they're always on either side of a river. Okay, and what happens is these meanders, these big curves that we see here in the river, eventually the water will eat straight through and the river will flow a little straighter and it cuts off that whole section and it becomes what we call an oxbow lake. So it's not really a lake, it's just a section of river that was cut off. Okay, so in this picture at the very bottom, you could see how the river right here is getting close together. Eventually, the dirt right here will wear away, so you have this curve. The outside part of the curve is where erosion takes place, and it's going to eat through that until it touches the river over here. And what will happen is the dirt that it's carrying will fill in, and then we'll have another oxbow lake. Okay? So again, we'll go way more into detail with that at a later date. Okay, and our final slide for today, I did promise that it was going to be a short video. Things called river basins and divides. Okay, so all the land drained by a river system is called its basin. Okay, or a watershed. All right, so local rivers have watersheds, which are going to be the land that's feeding into that river. All right, so if you live in a watershed, very important that you are not using things like fertilizer on your lawn because that will poison the water. Okay, so one river system's basin is separated by another by something we call a divide. All right. And it's the two highest points between two river basins. Okay. It's called a continental divide, and it separates the rivers that flow into different oceans. So here are the main river basins in the United States. And then within each of these river basins, there are smaller river basins. All right. So for us, we're in the Northeast River Basin, but you could see a good chunk of New York goes into the Mid Atlantic River Basin, and a section of it goes into the Ohio River Basin. All right. And basically, if you were to check, you'd notice that each of these areas all have a major river, okay, in them that things are going to ultimately flow to. All right. So for the Northeast, that's going to be the Hudson River. Okay, in the Ohio area, we're going to have the Ohio River. The lower Mississippi is the Mississippi River, and so on. Okay, so there are major rivers that are going to be found in each of these areas. Okay, so that's going to do it for the new material for today. Again, tomorrow you're going to have some test questions posted that are for practice. Later in the day, I'm going to post a video where I'm answering the questions. If there are specific questions you need me to focus on or very specific things you want me to make sure I cover, just send me that message. All right. Again, I hope everybody's being well, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks.